I'm Michelle Horan. I'm one of the registered dietitians with Nutrition in Motion. Um, One of the things that you'll notice is that as much as I like to think I'm pretty tech savvy, like I said, with that mouse thing, it really throws me off. So I love to have my talks and sessions be interactive. So I'm going to try to figure out how to get back and forth between that chat box. But if I can't, and if you're like trying to ask me a question and I'm not acknowledging you, please don't hesitate to unmute yourself and ask a question. We've actually got a lot of content to cover today between now and 11 o'clock, which is when my session is scheduled for. So I'll try to move through it fairly quickly, definitely open to questions. But if we start to get a little bit sidetracked, I'll invite you to hold your questions to the end. I'll try to save some time at the end. But I really, like I said, I'm happy to be here with you guys today. Thank you so much for joining me. Feel free, if you want to see your faces, to go ahead and put your video back on. It's really nothing personal that I didn't have the heads there. I just, as I mentioned before, for a couple people who are on, if it were me, I know I'd be in my pajamas and a bathrobe right now. So I wanted to just not have anybody have that panic moment of log into a meeting and then, oh, suddenly there's a video of me and I'm scrambling to turn it off. So thank you all for coming today. The focus of our time is going to be really taking a look at what we can do to streamline and just take away some of the stress that's actually associated with meal planning and that kind of aspect of our lives right now. There's so much going on. We all have a lot on our plates. So I'm hoping to kind of take one thing off your plate by putting real good stuff on your actual plate. See what I did there? We're going to, again, we've got until 11 o'clock for this session. Feel free if you need to, because we're virtual, you can do whatever you need to do. If you need to stand up and stretch, go use the restroom, whatever you need to do, please don't hesitate. I'm just glad that you're with us today. For those of you that don't know much about us at Nutrition in Motion, I know Vicki mentioned a little bit this morning, but we're a practice group of mostly dietitians. We've got Vicki as our nurse practitioner as well. And our job is really just to work with folks on what, if anything, they can change or manage in their eating, lifestyle, activity to really optimize their health and wellness. And so again, today we're going to focus more specifically on meal planning and meal planning effectively. Just to kind of draw your attention, I'm super old school and I still have printed notes here because I don't trust tech. And sometimes it falls apart on me. So I do have paper notes here, so you'll sometimes see that I'm looking down. I really just want to make sure that I'm telling you all the stuff that I really wanted to share with you today, and that the end of the day doesn't come, or the end of the session doesn't come and I go, oh rats, I totally forgot to tell them about this. So I'll be looking down at my notes too. So let's go ahead and get started here. So some of the things that we're going to cover specifically today are really just trying to think carefully about what we're planning, give you maybe a little bit of tools to walk away with a little bit more confidence in terms of creating a meal plan that's going to work for you, that is not some fancy schmancy thing that you found online and printed that doesn't really apply to your life. Something that's really going to be realistic for you, but also kind of still trying to be on the healthy side of things and preventing waste. For a lot of us, not only right now, but just generally, we try to really be careful about how we're budgeting. Groceries can be super expensive. So especially now where a lot of us are out of work or struggling, we really want to make sure we're not throwing a whole bunch of food away and that we're saving some money that way and preventing that waste. So I don't know how many of you a lot of people hate meal planning. You're welcome to pop up in the chat box and share with me anybody who really loves it or really hates it. And if you really hate it, why? What is it that you don't like about this whole idea of meal planning? Some people love it and they're super organized and they're like, oh, I'm going to plan everything out and I'm going to plot it all out. And some people, it's just like, oh my gosh, this is a nightmare and just this awful task that has to be done over and over, right? Because everybody just keeps eating. It's not like we ever get a break from this, right? Oh yeah, and sometimes we want to be able to wing it, right? We want to know, just have what I feel like in the moment. I don't really want to think about that ahead of time. Yeah, just having time to plan, right? That's part of the hard part, right? Is carving out, when am I going to actually do this and think ahead? A lot of us are used to on the fly, maybe I work close to a grocery store and I just swing by on the way home, or we kind of do it in the moment. But right now, that approach isn't going to really work super well for us, because the goal is to really try to, even as things are opening back up, we really don't want to spend a lot of time at the grocery store or out in public around a lot of people still, because it seems that the threat's still pretty real right now. But the good news is a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today is not just applicable for right now in this moment. It's all stuff that we can apply going forward. So that will be something that we can kind of walk away with a little bit here. So first things first, just a brief moment to take a deep breath. I know we had an awesome time with Daylin for the yoga. We're going to do some medication later, and Vicky talked about breathing and stuff too. So just take a moment. Actually, you're all pretty zen now if you went to the yoga already. But just take a moment to like breathe in on a count of 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then out through the mouth for 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, if you went to the yoga, you're probably pretty zen already. But, this is so much on us. And for a lot of people, if we're used to, again, kind of picking up groceries on the fly, that's just not working right now. So this can be a lot all at once. Remember, too, that even if we're trying to stretch out our grocery shops, it's not like the grocery stores are actually closing. It's not like we can't go back if we need to. And it's not like all the stuff that's not stocked now, it's not like it's never going to be restocked. We just have to be a little bit flexible right now and start to actually have a plan, right? So the first thing that I encourage people to do is to do that walkthrough, right? This is kind of like a little bit like shopping at home. It's kind of taking inventory. And it's a great way to start a grocery list. So even if I'm not a list person, if I do this walkthrough, this gives me a chance to kind of see what I have on hand already and what I can actually work with. So you might start with the pantry and all the kind of dried goods or the canned stuff. See what the heck is in there. Like there might be some stuff hiding in there that you got for some recipe however long ago that you never got around to making, and you're like, pull out a can and you're like, hearts of palm, like what is this for? Take a look at things and be honest about if it's something you're actually going to use. If you're not going to use it, I know the food pantries right now especially are really hurting and would really welcome any donation. So take an honest look at what you've got. If you're like, holy moly, I have about 20 cans of diced tomatoes, start to think about what can I do with this stuff to actually use it up, so that when I'm making my list, I can save some money at the grocery store. I don't need to buy another 10 cans of something. And also be realistic too about what is reasonable to have a bunch on hand of versus things I don't really need a lot of. Like if, for instance, my family's not one that eats a ton of like French cut green beans in a can, then I really don't need to have a stockpile of that. Again, the grocery stores aren't closing. It's not Armageddon, and I'm not going to have access to food. It's just a matter of kind of planning things a little bit more thoughtfully. And then also too, there might be some stuff that needs to be thrown out. You know, if you're looking at things that you are super dusty and you don't know how long they've been in there, and maybe the date on the can is past, then it might be something that it's time to just toss it out. Or like a half open bag of some kind of a pasta or a grain that's been in there forever, it might be time to let it go. So again, this can be how we kind of start our list and kind of walk through, and then we might move along to the refrigerator and the freezer, see what we actually have on hand before we start making a list of getting all this stuff and then getting home and going, oh, darn it, I already had like 3 or 4 of those. And so as you're looking through and seeing what you have already, start to think about what can I do with this stuff? What can it be used in? If I have a bunch of tomatoes and beans, and maybe it's going to be a time to make a chili or something like that. Or maybe I've got, some other kinds of vegetables that I know I can use in a certain soup recipe that I haven't made in quite a while. And think about too, again, the stuff that I'm going to use more, I might be more realistically looking to have a little bit more on hand. So maybe if your family eats a boatload of peanut butter and you see that there's 1 jar of peanut butter and you're going to go to the grocery store and try to plan for a couple of weeks, you might need to get 1 or 2 extra depending on how much people are eating. But you don't want to be like my friend. And I tell her, it's so funny, I was talking to her the other day and I told her, I'm like, hey, I still use you an example in all of my classes. This is an actual text I took a screenshot of that my friend sent to me about how she had just gone back from the grocery store. Her son told her they needed peanut butter. And there's actually 8 jars of peanut butter there, but she counted that 7 were actually open. So for one, so there's a lot going on here and tons to unpack, which we're not going to talk about today. First of all, starting, of course, with like get your family all on the same peanut butter page for one, but that's another talk, I guess. But the bottom line is, we don't necessarily need to have a million around. And if we're not taking that inventory, this could happen to you, right? You could end up with 8 jars of peanut butter in the cupboard. So we don't want that to happen. So we want to try to avoid this, but still keep plenty on hand for healthy options. So, when we're looking to stretch things out, for a lot of people, if I'm somebody who's been going to the grocery store like every 1 to 3 days as a rule, it could be really hard to try to stretch out to like 2 to 3 weeks. So usually I like to think of, if we can plan for at least to only go to the grocery store maybe every 1 to 3 weeks at least during this time, that's pretty reasonable. You can stretch it, of course, to longer, but I feel like 2 weeks is a pretty reasonable time frame. And again, especially where more stores are a bit better restocked right now. We still have to be a little bit flexible with what we can get our hands on, but for the most part, things are stocking pretty well now. There's a lot less of that panic shopping happening. So again, the goal is going to really be to kind of reduce our exposure. We're in the store, reduce our exposure to other people, and kind of get in and out. So the first factor can be really just like being realistic and taking the time to either talk with your family, or if it's just you, to realistically look at the calendar. Right now, thankfully, that calendar is a little bit more clear for some people. We don't have a lot of extracurricular stuff, social stuff, kids doing sports and that kind of thing. But I know for some families, there's still 1 or 2 working people that are leaving the house to go to work if you're an essential worker. So factor in, what the work shifts look like. Who's working and when, who's going to be home, is there anybody around that can maybe start some of the dinner prep, or if I'm going to be working from home, if it's a big day of meetings, perhaps that's an easier day to do leftovers, that kind of stuff we really need to start thinking about. But before we actually make a plan for meals for the week, we kind of need to have an idea of like, how much are we even looking to do here? To some extent, it really depends, obviously, on the number of people in your home that are eating out of your refrigerator. So a smaller family that might be just yourself or 1 or 2 people, we might be able to get away with planning maybe only 7 to 8 meals for a 2-week block of time, depending on how open we are to using leftovers. A lot of the people that I work with one-on-one are super anti-leftovers, like no matter what form, they just never want to see that meal again. So it's one and done. So that person or that family would need to plan more meals, of course. If you're open to leftovers, they can be a really great stress relief for, either providing an additional lunch that you don't have to think about, or providing an additional dinner that you don't have to cook. So if you're a smaller family, you can get away probably with planning like 7 to 8 meals for a 2-week chunk of time. If you're a bigger family that's maybe 3 or 4 people or more in the house, probably going to be looking to at least 10 to 12 meals to kind of cover that time. And I do still encourage people, especially during this time where everything is so weird and there's not really any normal, to just cut yourself a little bit of slack. And if you have the means to do so, to go ahead and still allow yourself some takeout, whether it's once or twice a week. It can be a great break, especially again for parents that might be working from home and trying to homeschool, and or people that are going to work and just in dealing with, if you're an essential worker, the burden of being exposed to lots and lots of people every single day. You guys are all warriors and we really appreciate what you're doing. So if you're able to help also support the local economy, it's reasonable to kind of have takeout on your kind of backup list for a little bit of a treat, a little bit of a break from that, like constantly prepping meals and constantly cooking. And it brings a little bit of normalcy back, right? Like just a little bit of like, ooh, we got something from outside the home, instead of just always being responsible for preparing that meal. So we're going to start by looking a little bit about, these are just some ideas about how to go about choosing what you're going to make for dinner. I wonder for you guys, actually, before I even kind of jump into this, how do you typically figure out what the heck you're going to be making for meals for the week? How do you pick what to make? And again, if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to, or you can just write it in the chat box. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of what you already know how to cook. If you've got like just a certain repertoire, you just kind of draw from that, kind of cycle through. Yeah, sometimes just by looking at the refrigerator, seeing like, okay, what here is really on the verge of throwing out, what needs to be used up, and try to get rid of that as quickly as you can. Anybody ever done that thing we think about, just like, okay, I'm going to make chicken, right? Yeah, or some people are just using like based on what they have, what's going to go bad, if you feel like experimenting. In some cases, we might be saying, okay, it's going to be chicken for dinner. Well, it's like, holy cow, there's like 5 million things it can do with a piece of chicken. You're like looking at the chicken, like, what am I going to do with you? There's so much. Or we make that mistake, maybe not a mistake, but we kind of fall into this black hole of, oh, I'm just going to search the internet, like healthy chicken recipes. And then you find yourself like, what happens then? Like half hour later or more, you're scrolling through like a bazillion recipes on Pinterest or whatever, and like, oh, but I don't have that ingredient. And then half hour passes, and then if it's like my house, might be somebody at the door, like, what's for dinner? Okay, so now I've just spent a half an hour looking at recipes. That's all lovely and good. Maybe I got some good ideas, but it's a half hour later and I still have nothing on the table and I still have no plan. It's like a black hole, right? Yeah. And so it sounds like Vicky's saying not to be responsible. You know what? My family did the same thing. Like, what do you want for Mother's Day? And I was like, honestly, I'm not cooking. Like, I don't want to think about it. But what do you want? I'm like, I just don't, just take care of it. That's the thing I want you to do. Take care of it. So yeah, we sometimes just look at a piece of chicken or something like, I don't know what I'm going to do with you. So it can be helpful to narrow it down from, like 5 million things into maybe like 5 choices, right? For some people, that means, again, you could just go to the fridge, what the heck is in here? But again, if we're talking about trying to plan ahead and we're trying to make a meal plan list of the things that we're going to make for these couple weeks, we might base it again just on like whatever's the main event for the particular meal. If it's going to be a veggie-based meal, a plant-based meal, if it's going to be a chicken meal, a shrimp meal, whatever it may be. Or I find it actually makes it a little bit easier for people to start thinking about like cooking method. Like, oh, okay, so maybe so-and-so is the griller in the house. And so this person's going to be home this afternoon. So I'm going to put something on the grill. Or this day I'm actually going to be working from home, or I don't have to go to work. So I can put something on in the crock pot and be there to keep an eye on it for the day or something like that. So think about the type of cooking method that makes a big difference for some people and can help to narrow it down at least a little bit. And I know somebody said too, in terms of like how much time you're going to have. Again, that's where the looking at the calendar comes into play, trying to see, if you're planning ahead, if you know that there's going to be a week or two or a couple days within those weeks or two that you're just not going to have that time. If you're going to be really busy, trying to plan at least a couple different meals that are going to be things that you can pull together in like under a half an hour or so. So again, we don't want to use up all of our meal prep time on scrolling the internet forever. For some people, they might have a recipe box kind of saved on certain websites or a specific Pinterest page that's your go-to, and it's almost like using a cookbook, which is awesome. But trying to think about like, trying to pick a method of cooking can really help to narrow it down. And that doesn't work for everybody, but it's just another option. So if we're talking about these 2 weeks, for example, try not to overthink it. Just, again, try to come up with that list. Again, if I'm 1 or 2 people, like 7 to 8 meals. Once you've got the stuff in the house and you start to look at what you've got, it's almost kind of naturally going to fall into play that you're going to want to prepare the things that first week that need to be cooked sooner. And then you'll naturally have a choice of things that can be done that second week that are going to be a little bit hardier. But of course, anybody here list people? Some people are totally list people and some people are not. And they're the ones that are like really winging it, running in and the way home from work kind of deal. For me personally, I'm totally a list person. And I know a lot of my clients are really list people. What can happen to a lot of us if we don't make a list is we might go in, and even if we have like 3 or 4 things that we're like, I know I got to go get these things. If we don't have a list, sometimes we can walk out with like 10 things and still be missing one of the key things that we went in for. It happens to a lot of people. So especially right now, even if you're not a list person, it's a really great time to have a list, because what's the grocery stores like right now? It's crazy, right? I mean, it's first of all, you might be standing outside in line for a while, and everyone's sort of like doing that thing of like comparing who's got a mask on, who doesn't, and you might get the hairy eyeball if somebody kind of cuts too close to you. It's really stressful. So if you don't have a list, we sometimes are also doing that thing where we're sort of like back and forth across the grocery store, right? So Samantha, who kind of pulled this content together and was gracious enough to let me present it to you today, she was talking about how she always thinks about, what does a security camera person think when they see me like back and forth all through the grocery store? Like, that girl must be crazy. You know, she's like over in this one aisle and then back over here. If there's no list, we really have no direction. And a lot of grocery stores right now are implementing that one-way aisle thing also. So that would make it really hard now to get in and out of the grocery store pretty quickly if you have to like only go one way to go back for things. So think about, again, trying to have some kind of a list. It helps us to stay focused, helps us to get us in and out of the grocery store a lot faster. But also too, think about like not just having like one big list. If it's on the back of an envelope from junk mail or whatever, try to think about breaking that big giant list down into at least like, you know, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 little mini sections. Like maybe I'll have a produce section, maybe have a dairy section. Some people that I work with will go, you know, even by aisle. A lot of the grocery stores will have available online their aisle by aisle kind of breakdown of where you can find things. So a lot of people that I work with will have it by aisle, so you can really fine tune how you're going through the grocery store. Again, if you're not a list person to begin with, that might be just like a little bit overkill for you, but try to keep it at least somewhat chunked out so you can get in and out a little bit more carefully. It also helps us to prevent, you know, kind of buying everything in sight. Again, we don't want to hoard food. We want to just buy what we're able to use so that we're not being wasteful too. And then again, once we've made that meal plan, we can start to do, you know, look again at that walkthrough. What do I already have? What ingredients am I going to need to make these meals happen? So one of the things, again, that to try to keep us most healthful, and I think, and Vicki mentioned a little bit already earlier today about an anti-inflammatory style of eating, just trying to focus a lot on our plant foods. We don't necessarily think of vegetables when it comes time to like trying to stretch out our grocery shopping. But it can be helpful to think about what's going to last longer and try to plot things out that way. We still do want to try to get our plant foods in. And thankfully, a lot of grocery stores are pretty well stocked in the vegetable department these days. And how we look at this piece of our meal planning isn't super drastically different from what we normally would be doing outside of a pandemic. We want to think about what we're actually going to use. So please don't take this list and be like, oh, Michelle told me I have to get like all these vegetables for the next couple weeks. Please don't do that. This is just an example. It's by no means comprehensive. It's really just an example of like what types of things are going to be better used in that first week from the grocery store, where, you know, it's going to be kind of some fresher stuff that's going to go bad sooner than some other things in that week 2 aisle there, or column there, is really going to be stuff that's maybe a little bit hardier, that will last a bit more into week 2. And some of that depends on how it's stored as well. Sometimes we get on this big kick, or especially if like, you know, the grocery store is my big outing. If I'm not somebody who's an essential worker, I'm not going to work every day. The grocery store is like, woo, I put on like real pants and I'm actually putting on makeup or something, right? I'm at a store and I might be on a kick like, oh, the vegetables look awesome. And that's it. We're eating healthy and I'm out and about and I feel good. But we don't want to go on that kick and then find, you know, the end of week 2, there's that like secret batch of stuff in the back of the fridge that's black and slimy. Some of you know what I'm talking about, right? When you're like, oh, rats, you know, it looked really good in the store, but I had no plan for it. And so now it's gone bad. And so once it's black and slimy, I'm here to tell you, there's not much you can do about that. It's got to go in the trash or the compost. So we want to make sure that we're only getting stuff that we did have a plan for. And again, that first week is going to be sort of more fresher style meals. So if I'm doing salads for meals, that's obviously, you know, greens and lettuces and that kind of thing is going to be better used that first week. Some bell peppers and things, maybe fajitas, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And somebody's saying, I hate to throw away food. Yeah, a lot of it has to do with our upbringing and or our budget right now. But some of us like really just cannot bear to throw away food. So we really want to try to plot this out carefully and plan it carefully so that we can prevent that. And don't forget too, there's always the option for frozen. Frozen produce is a very, very close second, if not just as good, depending on the season and where foods travel from, to fresh produce. Foods that are produce that's frozen rather is flash frozen. It's picked at its peak freshness, peak ripeness rather, and then it's flash frozen, so it maintains and preserves all the phytonutrient plant chemicals and the nutrient composition. So it can be a great second. And the awesome stuff about frozen is that not only is it pretty economical and budget friendly, you can get a bag of frozen veggies for like $1.50. Frozen fruits usually between like $2 and $3 for a bag or a pound's worth. So that can be a great backup strategy, again, that will last. You only take out what you need and the rest of it goes right back in the freezer. So that can be something that kind of saves you a little bit as well. We can do the same kind of approach with the fruits as well. We don't want to necessarily buy all of these things on the list. And again, I put a couple asterisks in there because there's some things that will keep a little bit differently depending on how you store them. If you put them in the refrigerator, you're going to buy yourself a little bit more time. But think about only buying what you actually enjoy or what you're actually going to use. Some people that I work with will go, oh, like I love pineapple and melons and stuff, so I'll buy them. And they sit on the counter, and then when I'm not looking, they start to go bad. And then I didn't get around to it and I never cut it up. So be realistic with yourself, be real. Like, am I actually going to get around to cutting that? Or is it way easier to have kind of grab and go things like apples and pears and that kind of stuff? So be honest with yourself about what you're actually going to eat and cut up or prepare. And think about too, for fruits, for example, they can be super versatile in terms of being used for a snack or part of a breakfast. I might have an apple with peanut butter for a snack, for example, or it might use some berries in oatmeal or yogurt and that kind of thing. So we can really use them in a lot of different ways. And again, frozen can come into play here as well. So if you're going to put things in the refrigerator, that will keep them a little bit longer. We're going to talk in a minute a little bit more about like how to store that, because we want to make sure that once we've gotten all these things into the house that we don't let them go bad. Because again, that kind of defeats the purpose of having a plan. So when it comes to storing these things, remember that not everything has to go into the refrigerator. We probably want to keep some of these things here. You can't see, I'm pointing at the screen. But a lot of things we do need to put in the fridge, but some stuff can just stay right on the counter. And then if it gets to be time, like I have the avocados stored, I know a lot of people find avocados to be this great mystery, sort of like, oh, I take it home and it's hard and it's not ready. And the next thing I look and it's all like overripe and squishy and dead. We can kind of have things rotating. If I put it in the refrigerator, it's going to stop that ripening process. Or once it's ripe, I can put it in and buy myself a little bit more time. If it's already cut up, I can put it in the refrigerator very tightly wrapped to prevent it from going black and buy myself a couple more days, so to speak. Also too, thinking about things that don't have to necessarily go in the refrigerator. So you can save that space for things that really require it. So some people will sometimes put things like onions and potatoes into the fridge, which really isn't necessary. So you want to save that space for the stuff that really is going to go bad on you if it's not stored in the refrigerator. But most importantly, does anybody know how long toilet paper will last if you freeze it? I feel like the toilet paper thing is kind of coming and going in waves, but it's really only a matter of time before somebody really asks this. But I sometimes worry about somebody asking, because I'm telling people like anything you can. I'm always like, yeah, just freeze it. I'm actually thinking at some point I should probably try to get some commission from some freezer companies, because I'm always like the biggest fan of the freezer, not just for buying things that are already frozen, but for, storing leftovers and making extra backup things. But anyway, that's just me trying to be funny. So I hope you found that funny. But realistically, what can be frozen? I feel like I think Jeanette made a comment on the side there. So much stuff can be frozen. A good rule of thumb is anything that can be cooked or blended into a smoothie is great to go into the freezer. Some things can go right in, like hummus, believe it or not, even if it's store-bought or homemade. Even stuff like milk can be frozen just as is. Just want to like shake it up and thaw it out in the fridge before you use it. Some things we do need to cook first before we freeze them. Like you wouldn't actually freeze a bag of uncooked raw quinoa, right? That's not going to help you out anything. But if you've got pre-cooked grains, for example, if you're somebody who doesn't really like to take the time to make, brown rice or something, these grains take forever. Grains batch cook and freeze awesome. So you can make like a whole batch of it. If you're going to bother to make it, it takes just as long to make 2 servings as it does to make like 5 or 6. So you can batch cook this stuff, freeze it in smaller portions and stick it in the freezer so that you can pull it out for a fast meal sometime. Lots of veggies freeze really well. Some things you don't want to try to freeze, though, maybe some of the ones that are like higher water content. Obviously, I'm not going to freeze like lettuce, for example. I might freeze zucchini, but maybe not, cucumber. It's just going to be sort of like a puddle when you take that out. And again, anything that's once it's already cooked, if I've got some cooked sweet potatoes, for example, or again, those cooked grains, or if I make my own frozen dinners from some leftovers, if your family is a family that's really not on board or cool with the leftover thing, kind of making little mini frozen dinners that you can pull out at another time. Somebody that I've worked with does a lot of, they save a lot of leftover jars from peanut butter and jam and that kind of thing. And if it's soups and stews and that type of deal, they'll put those leftovers, even if it's not enough for like a whole family dinner, they'll put those small amounts into those jars and stuff and freeze it that way. And then it might be like, okay, if I take that out of the freezer someday, somebody's got a lunch out of the deal. And then again, for vegetables that are kind of like cookable veggies, so if I've got some peppers that are on their way out and they just can't possibly be worked into what I'm cooking in these next couple days, you might chop and freeze your peppers and onions and kind of have them on hand for a stir fry at another time, that kind of thing. All right. If you do find yourself though, like despite your awesome planning, you do start to find sometimes it happens, we're all human, that some stuff is going to start to turn on you. It starts to get wilty or a little bit sad looking. We can do things with that. Like, so for one, obviously, if you catch it in time, you can chop and freeze that stuff for another time. Like I was just talking about with the peppers and onions, for example, right? Chop and freeze it, save yourself those steps next time. Or if you do, you can add it to stuff that you're going to be cooking and making anyway. If I was going to do a stir fry or a soup or something like that, and I got some pretty sad looking kale kicking around that's really wilted, I can toss it right into that without any extra steps and just kind of work it into what was going to be cooked anyway. Zucchini is really easy for that. Again, some of the greens like spinach and kale is good for that as well. Or you can actually save these guys. Sometimes we can bring things back to life and revive them. So think of treating some of them like cut fresh flowers, if you will. So you're going to kind of trim, like, so, celery, scallions, even heads of lettuce. You're going to trim off the bottom and put the bottom into like a cold water bath. You can either, stand it up in a cup of cold water and keep that cup in the fridge, or stand it up in a cup and keep it on the counter. And what you'll find is probably overnight or so, what happens is it gets rehydrated and it brings more structure back to those cells. And instead of being like, all sad and wilty, it will actually come back for you. And then you can use it a little bit more easily. It kind of buys you more time again. Yeah, so once I start to like really look specifically, okay, now that we've got all this background about what kinds of things I'm going to use, how to plot it out, these are just some ideas of what some sample dinners might look like in that week 1 and week 2. For those of you that registered, which I think you all probably would have had to submit your email to get this, I'm going to send you an email after, if you like, with some of these recipes in case anything catches your eye. But you can see here we've got in that first week some of the things that are going to go bad a little bit more quickly. The chicken zucchini, popper zucchini would have gone bad a little bit more quickly. In week 2 is going to be things that are going to be really more hearty. I'm going to be using potatoes and carrots and onions a little bit more, maybe soups and stews, things that maybe came from the freezer that I had made the week before. So we're going to start to organize when we get home. We've got all those meals plotted out. What's going to be that week 1 versus week 2, again, based on how hardy the things are, how quickly they're going to go bad. So the week 2 might be using more of the canned beans, canned tomatoes, and that kind of thing. When it comes to looking at snacks, we're not going to go through like every single meal here, but I feel like For a lot of people, if you're at home more now, I'm not going to make anybody confess, but some of us, I'm just saying, are doing that whole, what I consider like a drive-by, where if we're either bored or we're between meetings or we're stressed or whatever, and we sort of like just swing by the kitchen, like just seeing what's going on here. I'm just going to like open up the cabinets, open up the fridge. And we sometimes catch ourselves, sometimes not, going like, what am I even doing? I'm not even really hungry right now. I'm just sort of like scoping things out. Like, I don't know what's going to have changed, but I'm just looking for a snack. So that can be really hard for a lot of us. But if we are having a snack, we want to think about trying to keep them balanced. If I'm having a balanced snack, it's going to hold me over a lot longer than if I'm having like just something that's just carb or just something that's just fat, for example. So if I have just an apple for a snack, for example, maybe I feel satisfied for a half hour or so. Versus if I have an apple with peanut butter or an apple with cheese, I'm probably going to buy myself about 2 hours or so. So these are just a few specific examples here. They're not for everybody, and you might see one or two to get a couple of ideas there that might work for you. But one of the key things for snacks is to try to keep things portioned out. Like, we don't want to stand there at the cabinet with the bag of chips in hand and sort of like, while I'm mulling over maybe what will be the next snack, or I'm just buying time till the next meeting, I really want to portion stuff out and walk away so that way I have a little bit more control. We talk to folks a lot of times about mindful eating. Vicki mentioned it earlier too. And that's a really key piece to try to keep us in line and stay eating healthy, but also prevent these snack accidents. Again, it might be a result of a drive-by, it might be a result of being bored or just not having things planned. What some people have taken to doing during this time is kind of having a designated snack of the week, if you will. Some people might make like a batch of blender muffins to kind of have those on hand for the week, or make some granola, or even if it's just like a packaged thing that I got. Although if you're like my house, if you buy packaged snacks at all, even if they're healthier ones, if you have kids, it's like the family is plowing through those snacks in like 2 days. So then you are probably at the point where you're like, okay, we've got to figure out maybe a batch of blender muffins or something else to make, because you all ate all the snacks in the first 2 days home from the grocery store. Not that that's happening to everybody, but for some. So try to think about, like, what would have been your previous normal? Like, before all this went down, what would your normal day have looked like? Ideally, we should all be trying to eat every 3 to 4 hours or so, and pretty balanced out, and kind of having a handle on our portions. So try to implement some of that now. Again, we're kind of past that initial like kind of off the rails craziness, and realizing this is going to last a bit longer. We really need to try to get a handle to try to keep ourselves as healthy and well, and feel good about ourselves too. We are going to have the times that these things happen, and it's going to happen, and we just need to kind of let it go and move on, and try to just plot things out a little bit more carefully. But think of where you're at. If you're somebody who's working from home, or you're just home right now, think about where you're stationed. There was a client that I was working with a couple of weeks ago whose desk space at home was literally at a kitchen table that was right next to the snack cabinet. He could truly sit at his desk, and like reach over and grab the jar of like Nutella or whatever. I forget what it was. It was some kind of like fake peanut butter kind of thing that was really a lot of added sugar and stuff. So think about where you're sitting. If there's any way you could relocate away from the food, or looking at the food, at least takes off that mental trigger to, oh, I want to be eating now. So try to think about what could be normal, and take some mindful breaks for yourself. Think about if you're actually sitting at a computer at home, or if you are home with children, just like actually, even if you take 5-10 minutes, if you have to squirrel away to the bathroom and pretend you're going to the bathroom. I know some people that do that. Do whatever you need to do. It doesn't have to be a formal meditation. Even some deep breathing, even like 1 minute of deep breathing, will give yourself a little bit of a break, and even try to get some movement in there as well. If you're somebody who's finding all of this stuff overwhelming, if you previously were going to the grocery store every other day, or doing ordering or buying food out a lot, this is a lot, and that's okay. It's totally fine to feel kind of overwhelmed to all of this cooking if it's not something that's normal for you. But know that there's a lot of resources out there available to help you. We're not born natural, awesome cooks or chefs, right? So some of these resources here can be helpful to give you different cooking tutorials and that kind of stuff. If at any point you're still overwhelmed, just know that for us as dietitians and with Vicki as well, we're available to meet through telehealth as well. And again, you'll have these slides. That's some of my information there. And oh, rats. Oh no, I just went out of the presentation. I just wanted to share with you too, I'm so grateful to have this opportunity that the Y put this together for us. And again, we're happy to all be here with you. They're a fantastic organization. I appreciate you all being here. And I hope that this, didn't necessarily turn us all into perfect meal planners and list makers and that kind of thing, but hopefully you got a couple tips that might make things a little bit easier, give you a little bit more confidence for doing some of this meal planning thing. So thank you all so much.